You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
All right, and welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. I am Derek, and riding solo tonight. So we'll it'll just be me rocking and rolling through this one tonight, and we'll have some fun here. We'll have a really good time, and so when we are ready to getting through this, we're gonna come through and definitely kind of hit up some of these matches, hit up some of these some of these start sits, all of these kind of good stuff. If you have questions, comments, go ahead and throw it in there. We'll have the whole gang back together here when it comes Tuesday, but for now, Kevin a little under the weather, so it's just me tonight. And let's go ahead, and we've got some questions coming in here, so we're going to go ahead and hit that up. Chandler over on YouTube, trade Stroud and Henry for Kyler, Achane, and Garrett Wilson, full PPR. I certainly can see the the potential upside on that one. And rest of season, I think I would probably lean the route of the Kyler, Achane, and Wilson side of things. When it comes down to it, I've got Stroud and Kyler kind of back to back. When it comes to it, I do think that we see probably Derrick Henry finish in the top 5, top 6 type of thing when it comes to running backs. I do think we see Devon Achane, top 10 to it. And so at that point, right, like not a ton of difference there that the Garrett Wilson side does kind of bring that thing home, just simply from the standpoint that we could potentially see you see enough upside for him to be really a pretty consistent top 24 wide receiver. So definitely that wide receiver 2 territory there. So Chandler, I like the move, and I would rather take the Kyler, Achane, and Wilson side in that trade. But great question. And guys, if you have any questions, throw them out there in the chat. Let's go ahead and chat those things up. Let's go ahead and talk about those. Let's get the lineups. Let's get these things ready, set to go here in week 5 to try and get to try and march toward those cash and trophies. So, Tony over on YouTube has a question coming in there. Need 2 running backs, PPR, Eckler, Kareem Hunt, Trey Sermon. So at that point, I'm assuming that this is a start 2 type of performance for this week, full PPR. The Austin Eckler route, right? Like a couple years ago, we wouldn't even be having this question, right? It would have been a smash, smash start, move on. But when it comes down to this week, Eckler, I can see some of the appeal there with the fact that Brian Robinson's questionable coming into this matchup. But let's just take a look here and see, right? So Eckler, Hunt, and Trey Sermon. So I've got Kareem Hunt over Austin Eckler at that point. And with Trey Sermon, they've already ruled out Jonathan Taylor this week. The fact that Anthony Richardson may also miss, like that, at that point, that leaves Joe Flacco, who we're not going to see take off and run at that point. So I do think we're going to see Trey Sermon really get kind of the exclusivity of the run game there. So this week, I would probably lean the Kareem Hunt, Trey Sermon side on that one and kind of rock and roll with that one. Chandler over on YouTube asking, start Wicks or Whittington. It's a good one, right? I can certainly kind of see the appeal on both of these guys. I would probably lean Wicks on this one. I do think that the upside is bigger there, right? Like I do get the appeal of Jordan Whittington and the Rams and the fact that they're a little bit depleted in that, but at the same time, I think that Dontavian Wicks probably has the ability to be a top 30 wide receiver this week. And I think Whittington's probably more in that wide receiver 4 territory for me this week. So it would certainly be the Wicks side on that one. Pareco over on YouTube asking, would rather have Kyron, Breece, Jefferson, and Deontay / Waddle, or Kyron, Jacobs, Jefferson, Garrett Wilson, Deontay / Waddle rest of season? So really the difference is more of a, would it come down to Breece Hall or Josh Jacobs is really kind of the difference that I'm seeing. Oh, I guess Garrett Wilson's in that mix there as well. Yeah, I can certainly see that, right? And Garrett Wilson does potentially provide some upside there. And so between the two, right, you're really talking about a trade of Breece Hall versus Josh Jacobs and Garrett Wilson. At that point, like, I get the depth and I get the flexibility that provides, but I think Breece has a much better rest of season than what we're going to see Josh Jacobs do. So at that point, it would certainly be a Breece Hall side of things, because I think Breece is going to be a top 3, top 4 running back kind of rest of season. Personally, I've got Josh Jacobs closer to about RB 16, 17 when it's all said and done. And I think, Garrett Wilson's probably a top 20 wide receiver rest of the season there. So if you are absolutely in dire straits when it comes to that wide receiver and really needing some of that, needing some of that depth there, I can certainly see it. But when making trades like that, I'd rather have the best player in the deal, and that best player is Breece Hall. A really good question, though. Pareco also follows it up with, I'd have to trade Wilson, Stafford, Jacobs for Breece, Shaheed, Jerry, and Judy. Redraft Superflex with Mahomes and Anthony Richardson as the QBs now. Yeah, I'd probably do it. Out of that, I think I would rather have the Breece side of that. So I would probably do it. Yeah, I'd probably lean on the Breece side of that trade still. Great question. All right, Raphael over on YouTube. Start 2 PPR: Dwaddle, Chase Brown, Antonio Gibson, Tyrone Tracy. I know it's stinky, but that's what bye weeks do with a 0 RB. I hear you on that one. So at that point, right, like, I get the potential appeal of Tyrone Tracy with Devin Singletary being doubtful, but at this point it's still doubtful, not fully out. So I'm probably not leaning on the Tyrone Tracy side of that. Antonio Gibson, right? We did see the news come out that Gerard Mayo is talking about that Antonio Gibson would be the starter, and Ramondre Stevenson will be in a backup role in this one here. Apparently, kind of fumbled the starting job away there, but so I can get the appeal there. Dwaddle, I think, is probably a start on that one, just from the standpoint that he's going to get the bulk of the running back work in Dallas, although that is an incredibly tough matchup here going up against the Steelers this week. But if I'm leaning on it, I do think that I am going to go with I do think that I'm going with the Dwaddle, Chase Brown side of things. Antonio Gibson's close. The matchup's certainly much better than what Dwaddle has, and Brown has a little bit of a tougher matchup going up against the Ravens this week as well. So out of those, Antonio Gibson probably has the best matchup there, but I would probably lean Dwaddle. I'd lean Brown. If you feel like starting Gibson over either one of those, I wouldn't put up too much of a fight. I mean, those ones there, I've got those guys probably within 6-7 spots from kind of, those 3 guys all kind of within the same 6-7 spots there in that RB3 type of range there. So, but if it's my roster, I'm probably going to lean the Dwaddle and Brown route there. Adam, start Wicks or DJ Moore. Interesting there. So, right, the Bears certainly haven't kind of blown anybody away with their passing game there. The Packers certainly have had a lot of firepower when it comes to that one as well. And you kind of mentioned couple that with the fact that both Christian Watson and Romeo Doubs are questionable in this game, right? That really could lean on Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks to be kind of the 1-2 punch when it comes to the passing game there. So I can certainly understand that one there. I'm probably still going to lean on the DJ Moore side of things there, right? When it comes down to it, I've got Dontavian Wicks kind of as a fringe wide receiver 2 this week. DJ Moore is kind of firmly in my mid wide receiver 2. So close, but this is kind of in my own rankings here. We're kind of talking in that like wide receiver 18 to 20 range versus the wide receiver like 23 to 26 range. So close. If you have a feel that one of those guys is going to blow up, I wouldn't argue. Wouldn't argue over the feel on that one. But if it's me, I'm probably going to lean on the DJ Moore side to start there. Really good question. Mr. Wumbo, welcome back in. Mr. Wumbo said he feels the pain. Went Mostert 8, Warren 9, and Spears 10. Yeah, that certainly is a little rough when you're drafting 8, 9, 10, and your 3 running backs are not available with those picks this week. Although it is looking like Mostert may be available this week in that on that one there. Haven't officially ruled him out yet, so could be interesting, right? Spears with the bye. Warren has already been ruled out, so certainly a lot of fun. Alrighty. Jay Hang over on 20 or over on YouTube is asking, would you trade Puka and Godwin for Marvin Harrison Jr. in half-point PPR? Would I trade? No, I don't think I would. I think that Chris Godwin is going to have a remarkably good season to it. I do think that Marvin Harrison Jr. will have a good season, but like just those two alone, I think are going to be pretty close when the season kind of finishes here and rest of the season. I've got those two really close to each other. And the fact that I've got to also give up Puka, who, right, he's going to be gone for a while yet, right? Some reports coming out that saying that he may miss another month here, but at the same time too, right, when he comes back, I could be getting some extra depth towards a playoff push there. And so at that point, I'm not giving up a 2-for-1, especially when one of those guys that I'm giving up, I see as pretty close to rest of the season as far as Marvin Harrison Jr. So this is one of those that when we're talking about it, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. probably is about wide receiver 9-10 for me rest season, and Chris Godwin's in that like a 12-13 type of range, right? Like both of these guys are really close when it comes down to it. And so at that point, I'm not wanting to do a 2-for-1 to move up just a little bit. Dub Nation, Dwan Johnson, Foster Monroe, or Noah Fant have to have one PPR. Man, that is some tough streaming type of options there when you're talking on the tight end side of things. But if we're looking for this week and this week alone, I do think that I would lean on the Noah Fant side of things. Dwan Johnson probably actually has a little bit better matchup. Kansas City's been a little bit more favorable for opposing tight ends. Same thing, with that Foster Monroe pick with both of them being in New Orleans. But at that point, the Dwan Johnson, the Foster Monroe side of things, you really got to try and decide who's going to catch the touchdown this week out of the tight ends. And if a tight end's going to catch a touchdown off the New Orleans roster, because if neither one of those guys comes down with the touchdown this week, it's not really usable for a fantasy position there for you. I like the fact that Noah Fant would likely be a better option at that point there, right? Like none of these options are great, but I would lean the Noah Fant if I had to start one of those. To be honest with you, if there was a guy like Conklin available on the waiver wire, I'd probably pick up Conklin and start him over all 3 of those. Just kind of how I would look at that. That's probably how I would roll. Really good question, Dub Nation. Dub Nation also has the question of Anthony Richardson, Trevor Lawrence, or Andy Dalton. PPR, gotta have one. I'm going to shy away from the Anthony Richardson side of things, right? Like One, he's dealing with the oblique. It's questionable coming into this game. If he doesn't play or doesn't have the rushing upside there, it's a really tough play to try and bank your week on that one there. Trevor Lawrence has certainly not been delivering great fantasy performances. Andy Dalton's kind of come out the gate swinging here since he's gotten that job, but a much tougher matchup here this week when it comes down to Andy Dalton, right? The Bears are giving up the third fewest points to opposing fantasy quarterbacks there. So certainly a rougher matchup there. Whereas the Colts have been a much more favorable matchup for quarterbacks, right? Like they're giving up the sixth most points to opposing fantasy quarterback. So as much as I don't really like having to rely on Trevor Lawrence on a week, this would be the week that I would be leaning on T-Law in all of those options there. Dub Nation also has the question of James Conner, Travis Etienne, Stevenson, or Ford need one for PPR. It's a good question, right? So when looking at these guys, you've got a few different kind of options there. Immediately, I'm going to kind of take Ramondre and toss that one out the window. I love the matchup this week, but the fact that we're going to be seeing him play kind of second fiddle this week leaves a lot to be desired, and I don't want to necessarily hang my fantasy week on that one. James Conner going up against San Francisco, tougher matchup on paper, but San Francisco has been allowing a fair bit of points to opposing running backs, right? Like it really is a neutral matchup there. There's not really a plus, not really a minus there. ETN, Jacksonville has certainly had problems on the offensive side of things, getting the things rolling, but the Colts do allow about the 11th most points to opposing fantasy running backs. So, I mean, those certainly a better matchup there. And Ford, okay, I get that one there too. I'm just not necessarily thinking that we're going to see Ford have a monster game here. So, between those options, I would lean James Conner over Travis Etienne, but it is incredibly close. And like when I say close, I mean it's a coin flip for me between the two. I would lean Conner just a slight bit though. So I like it. All righty, let's go ahead and head over to the next one. Nick over on YouTube. Should I start Tank Dell or Xavier Legette this week? So another good one, right? Like Legette has certainly kind of come on strong here recently. Tank Dell certainly been dealing with some injuries as of late. But Tank Dell was off the injury report and is ready to go on Sunday, right? So between the two, Chicago's been tough for opposing offenses. Realistically, they're kind of within about 4 or 5 spots in kind of my own rankings there. I would probably lean Tank Dell in this one here, but it is closer. All right, and Adam's saying, what about Wicks over Tyreek? It's been horrible in Miami. LOL. I don't know that's yes, that has certainly been the case, right? Like Miami has been tough, and I can certainly see the appeal of trying to play the Dontavian Wicks over Tyreek Hill, right? New England's been a tough matchup for opposing defenses. Miami's offense has looked absolutely just kind of putrid without Tua back there. So I can certainly see it. As much as I don't really want to be like, yeah, do it. I think this might be the week that that I may play Wicks over Tyreek, but some of that's going to depend too on what your lineup's really requiring there, right? Like if you're needing upside to kind of fit in and try and win that matchup, I think Wicks probably delivers bigger ceiling play than Tyreek with those offenses there. But some of that would be really, really tough there. Adam asking the question, start 2 between Wicks, DJ Moore, Tyreek, and Keon Coleman. At that point, I would lean the DJ Moore. He'd be my for sure start on this one. And as far as the Tyreek and Wicks, it kind of goes right back to what I was just saying on that last one, where it depends, right? If you're going to need upside to try and win this week, I'd probably lean on the Wicks side of things, because I just don't know that this Miami offense has the upside to try and get enough points there to make things happen. So whereas I think Green Bay, we're going to see some good good options there, and with Wicks potentially being kind of the second receiving option on this one could certainly spell some good things there. So Mr. Wumbo, have Richardson on the bench in one team with a super small bench, might just straight up dropping him. So it's tough holding on to a second QB, even with one with that much upside. Yeah, I get it. I wouldn't necessarily look at dropping him though, right outright. This is one of those that you may be able to potentially package that and try and move, get somebody else that still believes in that upside. And that would be where I'd be, looking at that one as more of a trying to see if I could make a trade, try and see if I could make a package deal and try and move up on a positional player, skill position, something like that to see if I could, potentially better my roster that way instead of, straight up dropping. So, alrighty, and then the GOAT 123 over at YouTube just traded Justin Jefferson for Zay. I'm assuming that's Zay Flowers and Bijan Robinson. Yeah, I can certainly see that one, right? Like that one there. Yeah, you get a little bit of depth. You get more of a depth wide receiver there. You get a running back that provides some top end, top end rest of season type of performances there. So I can certainly get that. I don't know that necessarily is one that immediately kind of strikes it up as immediate win or immediate loss on that one. This is one of those that as the season plays out, we'll certainly kind of see it. But I think you got probably some pretty fair value at that point. Adam saying that they appreciated the analysis there earlier. You are most welcome. And again, guys, if you have questions, comments, throw them in the chat. Let's go ahead and chat about those. Let's go ahead and keep rocking and rolling through some of this. Nick over on YouTube, drop Conklin for Kraft. They already have McBride. So it's a good one, right? Some of that would depend too, right? Like I'm not a super big fan of carrying multiple tight ends if it's a smaller bench to it, to the point where, if McBride is realistically, you're probably not going to play either one of those guys over McBride if he's healthy, right? So, and McBride did clear the concussion protocol. Certainly kind of good to rock and roll. The bye week isn't until week 11. So, unless you think that you're going to play Conklin or Kraft over McBride in any week until week 11, I don't know that I'm necessarily going to, be playing, be keeping a roster spot for that. But, some of that also depends on what else is out there and how the league's set up. So, but really good question, Nick. Bradley over on YouTube, just traded Monty and Tutu for Gibbs and Rome. Full PPR thoughts. Team is Jalen Hurts, Anthony Richardson, Fields, Mason, CMC, Gibbs, Jacobs, Nico, Marv, Mooney, Sermon, Brooks, Rome, and Algier. Suggestions: it's a 2 running back, 3 wide receiver, 1 flex. Okay, so I mean, I can certainly understand that. Between the 2 running backs, I'm a much bigger fan of Monty over Gibbs, and then a lot of that's just personal preference, right? But full PPR, Gibbs certainly makes a lot more sense, right? Monty isn't really certainly isn't the pass catching back in Detroit there. And between the 2, I'd rather have Rome over Tutu. So I get that one, and at that point, it certainly makes a lot of sense. And Gibbs certainly gives the PPR upside there. As far as the team, right? Like I like the fact that you've got the quarterbacks there. Unless it's a full PPR, I don't know that I'm necessarily, kind of rocking 3 quarterbacks outside of super flex leagues. But the Hurts and Anthony Richardson certainly required some high draft capital there, and Fields, great pickup off the waiver wire, late dart throw there. Mason CMC, love the fact that you've got the handcuff and you've got that going. Gibbs, Jacobs, right? Like you're really set as far as that running back room, barring injuries, things like that. But that's really kind of in lock there. I do like the Marv pick there. Mooney's certainly come on strong. And if Kirk Cousins continues to produce like we've seen the last couple of weeks, especially last night, I think that's a pretty solid room going forward there. Sermon, right? Like that's a kind of a 1, maybe 2 week rental. Brooks, we'll have to see what that looks like when he comes back, but I don't know that he's going to be. I don't know that he's even really going to necessarily see your starting roster with Mason, CMC, Gibbs, and Jacobs there. Odunze, I like the Odunze pickup there. It's going to be one of those that we're going to have to see what this thing looks like. Sometimes these wide receivers take a little bit of time to kind of develop and start showing up there. And so this could be a stash in a late season kind of play. So I certainly don't mind that. Algier has a little bit of flex play type of thing there potentially, and certainly had some depth if somebody goes down there. So I like it. As far as suggestions go, I may look at potentially trying to improve the wide receiver room, especially with it being 3 wide receivers. And at this point, really, there's about 3 guys that can start. And so an injury, something like that happens bye weeks, it's going to be rough sledding in that room there. So I would look at potentially maybe trying to package a quarterback and see what you could potentially get for a Brooks, something like that, and see if you couldn't try and get into wide receiver 2-3 territory with something like that. So not a bad roster though. Armando over on YouTube saying, "Hey, what's up, Akers or Tracy? Bye weeks and injuries have got him." Yeah, certainly a really good question there. And this one here, let's just take a look at what that looks like. Akers or Tracy. Yeah, I mean, these guys here, again, are pretty darn close for me. But, and we're talking running back 4 type of territory. I'd probably lean the Cam Akers side of things, right? He has a little bit better matchup this week. We've already seen that Joe Mixon listed out. Damian Pierce listed as questionable. May very well have the entirety of the backfield to himself there. Tyrone Tracy, right? Like, certainly has some appeal and some upside there, but Singletary's listed was listed as doubtful, right? Hasn't fully been ruled out there, so I'm going to take the guy that has the perceived volume play this week. Joe Kingsley over on YouTube. Would you rather watch the New England Miami game or? Yeah, no, that's not even a question there. We're going to go ahead and watch the New England game at that one, and it won't be very interesting. Andre over on YouTube. If I'm an ETN manager, should I be handcuffing Bigsby? I certainly could, right? But some of these questions, when it comes down to it, also kind of depend upon what the what the other options are there, right? Like if you're handcuffing Bigsby, right? Like at that point, it's really a opportunity cost as far as the roster and the bench spot's concerned, right? So are you handcuffing him over who to, for the bench, right? Like could be that if there's not really anything else out there, certainly it makes sense to handcuff that one. But if you're, if you're passing on other opportunities for guys just to be, you're handcuffing a guy, I wouldn't necessarily do that. And I do see that this one just came in. Be dropping Chase Brown for Bigsby. Would you do that? I would not. I'd rather have the Chase Brown than the Tank Bigsby side of things. I certainly can understand the thought on that. The thought of that one, because some of these guys you do want to make sure that you handcuff because of, if the guy in front of them goes down, what does that look like? But the fact that Travis Etienne is good to go Sunday, it doesn't really look like he's going to be carrying a. While he was limited in practice, they were to come out and said he's good to go. So at that point, Chase Brown has some standalone value. Tank Bigsby really doesn't for me, so I would not be dropping Brown for Bigsby. Bradley over on YouTube saying thanks for the feedback. Only reason I have 3 quarterbacks drafted Hurts, picked up Fields off the waiver for the Hurts buy. Yep, I like that one. But someone dropped Anthony Richardson, so I figured I'd just snag him up and see. Hurts 2 as a, or Hunt 2 as a running back. Okay, so yeah, you've certainly got a pretty good running back room there, and maybe that's the thing. Maybe Bradley, maybe what you look at is potentially trying to package Anthony Richardson and maybe a Kareem Hunt, right? Like you could probably get some pretty decent value off of that, right? Kareem Hunt probably doesn't have season long type of value when it comes down to it, with Pacheco potentially returning, probably right about the time that the fantasy playoffs are going to be kicking off there. So it certainly kind of limits some of that. But I'd see what I could do about potentially trying to package one of these running backs and package an Anthony Richardson, and see if at that point you may not be able to get crazy value out of that, but I'd be floating that out there to see if I could pick up a top 24-ish kind of guy, just to try and build a little bit of depth along that wide receiver room, especially with the start 3. So alrighty, and then Mr. Wumbo over on YouTube saying that they've been trying to put Richardson into every trade for teams that don't have a clear QB1. So it's always 2 for 1, 3 for 2, 4 for 3, but no one wants him. Sadly, where I could be holding Atwell or Leggett. I get it. So, each league's a little bit different there. So it'll be interesting to see, right? Like this is one of those two that if Richardson comes back, has 1 or 2 games, right? Like that could certainly change it quick, fast, and in a hurry. But it does always come down to just kind of reading the room and reading the league and seeing what's out there. But if everybody else is, if it's a 1 QB league, right, it does get tough to try and trade quarterbacks, just from the standpoint that unless they're a clear cut, top 3, top 4 quarterback, it does get tougher to try and trade some of those. But I can certainly understand that one, Mr. Wumbo. Julian over on YouTube, should I start Chase Brown or Rico Dwaddle this week? Mixon is still injured. Yeah, that is a good one there. Chase Brown, Rico Dwaddle, and let's just see how I've got that kind of sorted out here. And so looking at them, I've really got these guys kind of back to back. So at that point, these guys are kind of back to back for me, and I've got these guys probably within half a point of each other. Julian, and kind of my own rankings there. Dwaddle has the tougher matchup between the two, but I do like the fact that he is kind of the guy getting the bulk of the work in Dallas, even though that this Dallas run game is, well, it's a Dallas run game, right? But Chase Brown certainly has been doing well, but again, right, like we're seeing less than kind of 40% of the snaps on this one, and the matchup for Dwaddle isn't that, or the matchup for Brown isn't that much better than what Dwaddle's seeing. So I would probably lean on the Rico Dwaddle this week. So really good question. Mr. Wumble saying back to the Anthony Richardson, especially one that scored like 30 total points in 3 weeks combined. Yep. Certainly does get tough, right? Like well, we haven't seen the running work, we haven't seen the touchdown upside, we haven't seen those types of things kind of coming through here. So certainly a tougher deal to try and move off on some of those. Joe Kingsley, if Achane over on YouTube, if Achane has a good fantasy this week, should I try and trade him or hold him in hopes that Miami doesn't stink all year? Yeah, it's a good one, right? Like Devon Achane is, really kind of comes down to where you see him rest of the season, right? Like I do think that we see Devon Achane is still a running back one when it's all said and done at the end of the season. So it is interesting, right? Like it depends on what you can get for him, right? Like you just, I'm not going to say to go out and just make the trade and move him off your roster, right? Because it would have to be something where I'd be getting, equal or potentially moving up some value on that one to try and trade out of that one. And this is one of those two that I do think that we see Tua back before the end of the season. And so I do think that we're going to see the Miami offense pick up and we can see some of this explosive come through. So I don't know that I'm going to move off of Achane just to move off of him. It would have to be something where I'm getting like or better value for trading him. But good question. Chris over on YouTube, what tier do you have London the rest of the season? Right? Like this is one of those that had you asked me before last night, I was I've got Drake London in our good old boys home league, right? Like and had I not been bit by some injuries throughout the wide receiver deal, right? Like I had Puka, I had Rashee Rice in that league. It's a start 3 wide receivers. Like there was a good chance that I may have been pivoting. Had either one of those other wide receivers been healthy and may have had London on my bench, but because of that, was certainly in the starting lineup and rocking and rolling there. So had you asked me before last night, I would have told you that it was becoming kind of dismal at that point for it. But last night, I think we saw the Kirk Cousins that we expected to kind of start the season off. And we started to see what we would have expected to see a little bit more season long from Drake London, and that connection that him and Cousins were having out there was very, very real. So I would say that Drake London probably finishes this season as kind of a top 15 wide receiver. And I think that we're gonna be feeling pretty good about that one the rest of the way through. So I don't think we're gonna see him kind of break through and become elite wide receiver 1 type of range. I don't think that we're gonna even see him really get into wide receiver 1 at the end of the season, but I do think that he's gonna be very solid top end to mid end type of wide receiver 2 for a fantasy roster, and I think that he'll be able to be probably much more consistent going forward. So really like that question. Chris over on YouTube, also Achane or B-Rob this week. At that point, with B-Rob being questionable going into this game, I am going to lean on the Achane side of things there. If B-Rob's fully healthy, I probably would have had him bumped up and probably would have had him slightly above Achane this week. But yeah, that injury designation being questionable at this point, I would say I'd lean the Achane side of things over B-Rob. Andre over on YouTube, Dell on waivers. Would you drop one of these for him? Wicks, Keon Coleman, Worthy. Man, I don't know that you can drop Worthy at this point, especially with Rice going down. It'll be interesting to see what this Chiefs offense looks like going forward. Like this week, I think will be a little telling on that one about what we may see and what that may look like. But I wouldn't be dropping Worthy at that point. Montavian Wicks, I don't know that I'm dropping that one, right? This is This is one of those that I think we should see. I think we can see some really good things there. But I do think that I like Tank Dell better than Keon Coleman kind of rest of the season. So I wouldn't mind moving off of Keon Coleman to pick up Tank Dell. Mr. Wumbo over on YouTube saying most are also coming back, but who knows what that even means, right? Like that's a great point. We've seen Mostert miss the majority of the season with that chest injury, but yeah, when he comes back, who knows, right? Like, and it's one of those that it could mean better things for both of them, right? Because right, and we saw this play out in several different scenarios throughout the couple of years. But last year with Mostert and with Achane both in there, like was incredibly. Both of these guys were incredibly efficient with the touches that they were getting, and at that point we may see that play out there a little bit more. Whereas, it doesn't necessarily require the volume to get there, but they're able to get that job done when simply able to get it done by being efficient with the touches. And so if each of these guys is getting 15 touches, that may actually do better things than if either guy was getting 20 touches outright. So certainly a good call there. Nick over on YouTube, what do I do with Rashee Rice? Wait. That's what I would say, is just to wait on that one, right? I want to see what the reports come out of, right? Like from what we've seen right now, the reports are that the Chiefs are waiting for swelling to kind of dissipate, to do more tests to see what that looks like. And so this is one of those that I'm going to wait and see. Wait and see what that looks like, right? From what it sounds like, they may be doing more tests early in this next week. So I'm going to, if I've got an IR spot, I'm going to put Rashee Rice on the IR spot and let that ride. If not, I'm going to let him hang on my bench for this week, and I'm going to wait and see what the reports come out with here in the next week or so as to what I may do, right? Like, last thing I want to do is to drop a guy and turns out that he can return in 5, 6, 7, even 8 weeks at this point, right? Because Rashee Rice coming back in even 8 weeks puts us right at fantasy playoff time, and that could be a very welcome pickup to a lot of rosters come that. And I don't want to have to spend fab on somebody that spend fab on somebody or a waiver priority to try and get a guy that if I just hang on. And I think we'll have a lot clearer image on what that'll look like here once this once these additional tests are done. Great question though. FBU asking pickup hunt. Yeah, it's certainly worth it, but it also depends on pickup hunt for who, right? Like if you have to drop somebody, if you have to do some of that, there's a little bit of that depends kind of answer in there. But if you're looking if you got an open roster spot, yeah, pickup hunt. A Manster over on YouTube just traded Devontae and Worthy for AJ Brown. Thoughts? Yeah, I can certainly see that one, right? Devontae has been disappointing for fantasy. He hasn't really played much, but neither has AJ Brown. Xavier Worthy certainly has had some boom bust type of plays there. So I can certainly understand the thought and kind of where that comes into play at. And I think I like AJ Brown rest of the season a little bit better, but it does require him to actually be healthy and coming back there. So I think if I was to kind of look at that and again, right, some of that's going to very heavily depend on what happens with Davante Adams, because if he goes to a different spot where we could see a lot of that come through, that is, yeah. At this point, with what the knowledge we have, I would lean on the AJ Brown side of things because I do think that AJ Brown will be your kind of top, the safe side, probably top 10 wide receiver rest of the season. Davante Adams, as the situation currently sits, I think is kind of knocking on the door of wide receiver 2, and Xavier Worthy is certainly kind of a up and down play, boom bust type of potential, where I think we're talking wide receiver 3, potentially wide receiver 4 kind of territory. So I like it. Certainly went out and got the best player in the deal. That's for sure. Mr. Wumbo, Tank Dill gives big Calvin Ridley vibes when you see him and think, oh man, this should be something right. Then you check their stats and they're like, man, if they had different names, they'd be like 3% rostered. Yeah, I can certainly understand that one, right? The Tank Dell is is one that the boys were saying kind of all throughout the offseason that where Tank Dell was being drafted was a bit of an overpay on that one. But at the end of the day, right, Tank Dell certainly does have has upside to it, right? He's been that kind of big splash play kind of guy last season, and that was what kind of set him and got him on the course there. Calvin Ridley, yeah, yeah, certainly one of those that has been also kind of splash up and down type of plays there. So um, it's certainly tough to keep these guys rostered, and certainly tough to tough to play them for sure. FBU trade Joe Mixon for Achane. Thoughts? Yeah, I could certainly see that one. The fact that Joe Mixon has missed a fair bit of time. I think we're going to see him back sooner than later when it's all said and done. So, I mean, I get it. I think healthy Joe Mixon, I'd rather have the volume on that one, and that the Texans offense can certainly be high powered. Same thing with the Dolphins, right? They can be high powered, but I think I would lean the Joe Mixon side of that, but I feel like I'm probably in the minority on that one. FBU. I think if you asked most of the folks in the fantasy community, most of the analysts out there, they would tell you that they'd rather have Devon Achane over Joe Mixon. But I'm willing to be on the lone guy that's a little crazy on that one. So, good question though. The Schmitty over on YouTube asking Ramondre Stevenson, Sermon, Javonte Williams, start one. It's a good one, right? Like a couple weeks ago would have been a pretty easy Ramondre, move on, call it a day, right? But the news coming out with him playing second fiddle here going into this week certainly puts a pause on that one. The Trey Sermon side of things, like I get that one, right? Certainly a lot of potential for Trey Sermon to have a very kind of big week here. But let's just kind of see how I have these guys kind of rocking and rolling here. It's interesting, right? Because Ramondre has a pretty juicy matchup. Javonte has an okay matchup when it comes down to it, right? The Raiders given the eighth most points to it, and the Trey Sermon side of things, right? The Jaguars are allowing the third most points to opposing fantasy running backs. I've got these guys kind of right back to back to back. They're all pretty close with each other. Man, I would probably. I honestly would probably lean the Javonte route, followed by Sermon, followed by Ramondre. Would be how I'd probably roll that, and I don't feel great about that one, but that's kind of how I would roll that one out there. Is Javonte, Sermon, Ramondre this particular week? Really good question. So Ramondre, LOL. Yeah, yeah, certainly one of those that the time you pivot off of a guy and put him on the bench, that's when they go off, right? So I can certainly understand that logic too. But yeah, if I'm going through, I'd go Javonte, Sermon, and Ramondre. FBU trade Garrett Wilson. Again, it would trade, it would heavily depend on who you're able to get, right? Like, I don't know that I necessarily want to give up on the Garrett Wilson side of things at this point. I do think that they were still able to potentially see some things here going forward for Garrett Wilson and what that connection with Rodgers is looking like there. So it very much depends on for who. Would you rather have Jacobs or Ayuk rest of season? Over from Blue Yays over on YouTube. Ooh, that's an interesting one, right? Usually it's not two separate positions there that we get a lot of these questions on, but let's just kind of take a look here and see what that looks like. Yeah, I would probably lean the Josh Jacobs route on that one. Yeah, I would lean the Josh Jacobs route on that one there. I'm not sure how to sell. M. Rogma over on YouTube asking, would you trade Bijan for Taylor? I would rather have the Bijan side of that trade. Andre over on YouTube, curious on your thoughts on this team 12-team redraft, full PPR, Mahomes, Bijan, ETN, DK, Pickens, Ferguson, flex is Scary Terry. The bench is Chase Brown, Pollard, Bucky, Coleman, Worthy, Wicks, currently 2-2. Yeah, Bijan certainly didn't help you out last night. That's for sure. I do like the Scary Terry and the flex type of thing there, but yeah, at that point, Andre, I think you've got a fairly decent roster. I would personally probably be trying to make some upgrades at the quarterback position, and I realize that when everybody hears the name of Mahomes and then hears me say upgrade at the quarterback position, certainly sounds almost a little blasphemous, right? But when it's all said and done, Patrick Mahomes this year is QB 16, QB 17, and so right there's certainly a lot of guys that could potentially you'd be potentially better off playing week in week out at that point. So could I potentially move off Mahomes, get a potentially actually improve on that one, get worse on name value, but improve at the position? Sure. And in doing so, could you pick up a stronger wide receiver option there? Sure. Right. Like I like Pickens and he certainly has some, big upside, splashy play type of thing, but Pittsburgh hasn't really been throwing the ball around. And I don't know that we're going to necessarily see that change, right? Like they're playing very much, how Steelers want to play football. They're controlling the clock. They're not, not really turning the ball over, playing behind the defense, like all the things that are Steelers football they're doing. And that just doesn't necessarily mean, chucking the ball around the yard or taking those deep shots of Pickens. I do like the DK play there. I do like what we're starting to see out of Scary Terry and that connection with Jaden Daniels the last 2 weeks. So I do think that there's something there, but yeah, I would potentially be trying to upgrade it at the wide receiver position and see if I could find something that potentially could move DK into wide receiver 2 for me, or find another like incredibly solid tight end 2 to kind of play in, play out there. So I like that. I like the bench, right? Like there's definitely some good depth there as well. So overall, I think you've got a pretty good roster there, Andre, but I would be looking at potentially trying to upgrade a little bit at wide receiver and see what else I could try and look at quarterback there. And Andre, I'd be very curious to see what quarterbacks are available on the waiver wire. If you toss that in the chat, let us know. That'd be awesome. The Smitty over on YouTube saying that they're just going to play Ramadre. He has something to prove. Yeah, there is something to that, right? Like there's always that thought about, you play a guy in a contract year, you play a guy that's, kind of just lost his gig, fumbled it away, so to speak. But I mean, I can see it. If you've got a hunch, go with your hunch and play your gut. You're the person managing that roster, and you'll be the person playing that thing, and really, that decision will rest with how you want to run that thing. So I can certainly understand if you want to play him. Julian over on YouTube, what do you think about Justice Hill over Dwaddle? More receiver work, don't you think? Yeah, there's certainly the option for more receiving work out of Justice Hill, right? Because the Ravens certainly aren't using King Henry when it comes to the passing game and the 2-minute drill and what that looks like. But between the two, I would probably end up playing Rico Dwaddle over Justice Hill. It's close, but I would have Dwaddle slightly over Justice Hill going in here to week 5. Really good question. Mr. Wumbo, in PPR, what are your thoughts on Hunt versus Sermon? Sermon's game, 50% of chance of rain versus Jacksonville, which should be great, but I've heard he's just a body, and ESPN says he has 7 catches over 3 years. Yeah. So Trey Sermon, right? Like I've been watching Trey Sermon since back in the days when he was at Oklahoma. And really I thought he would be a better back in the NFL than what we've seen so far, right? Like, but at the same time, and I can get the thought about the chance of rain versus Jacksonville and the run game and all of those things, right? If I'm going into this week and I'm looking to play either one of those guys and I've got to pick one, I don't know that I want to hang my hat on Trey Sermon between those two, right? Like I would lean the Hunt side of that one. There's a little bit more to that one, but Hunt had a decent game last week, which is good news, but multiple other options on the team, both Pirine and Steele, where Pirine got a touchdown plus limited practices, which is normal, but Monday game. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly some of that could be there, right? But Kareem Hunt, I think out of those options, I would still lean on the Kareem Hunt side of things. I mean, you bring up some very good points, and you certainly, there's a lot of things pointing that Sermon should have a good game here, but I think I personally would rather lean on Hunt, and if I'm making the decision for my roster, I'd probably lean Hunt there. Alrighty, Chris over on YouTube, any upgrades? 12-man roster, PPR, Hurts, Achane, Mason, Lamb, Nico, London, McBride, B-Rob, Chase Brown, Jennings, Brooks, Bigsby, Wandell. Certainly a really good roster. I really like the starting lineup there, right? I'm assuming this is a start 3 wide receiver type of deal, and that and that B-Rob's in the flex there. So I don't know. I really, really like that starting lineup there. The only thing that worries me is a little bit on the depth of that particular roster, right? If something should happen to one of those 3 wide receivers, it is going to be a little difficult to try and play somebody and be competitive, right? Juwan Jennings, I think we've had the one, Juwan Jennings sighting that we're going to get this year. I think that one's already happened. Wandell, certainly has had a game here and there. Again, I just don't trust this Giants offense there. So that would be something that I'd be looking to potentially try and make a move, try and make an upgrade, is get a little depth, a little bit more depth on the roster here with on the wide receiver side of things. Wouldn't necessarily be looking to make a move at trading one of my wide receivers or really trading my starting lineup, but be really kind of working the waiver wire, working potential trades, and just kind of working the room there a little bit and seeing what the options may be. Mr. Wumbo says that they've changed their mind like 20 times on the Hunt versus Sermon. I get it, right? Like they said, we've certainly some good points and some positives either way, but I can certainly understand the dilemma. Andre, going back to that quarterback and that waiver wire question, saying that the QBs are pretty rough. Some people are weird in rostering 3 QBs. So the top 5 are Kirk, Danny Dimes, Andy Dalton, Minshew, and Nix. If Kirk Cousins is available, I'd be picking him up. I would be picking him up at that point and just seeing what that looks like kind of rest of the season. Because if what we're going to get is any version of what we kind of got last night, and I think we're going to see more of what we got last night than less. I don't know that we're going to see that much passing work, but Kirk Cousins looked like Kirk Cousins last night, not the guy coming off of injury, but the actual, the guy that we kind of anticipated coming into the season. So I think that's could be a pretty good mix pickup there. And then at that point, Andre, if I'd probably hang on to Kirk, see what this plays out the next week or so, and then be continuing to work the waiver wire, continue to work some of those things. But if Kirk's going to be the guy that can get you week in, week out, and get down into that fringe QB1 type of range, and maybe the answer is to move off Mahomes and bring in an elite kind of wide receiver, and some of the name value alone may get you there with a trade like that. But I'd probably pick up Kirk and then kind of play this roster and let it see how it settles in for the next week or two, and really kind of see what how that plays out there. But really good question. Chris over on YouTube, any question or any upgrades for the 10-man half-point PPR? Hurts, Henry, Mason, AJ Brown, Nico, Debo, Kraft, Achane, B-Rob, Wandell, and Jonathan Taylor and Guerrero. To 10-man, man, I don't know that I'm going to do much there. I'm not necessarily a big fan of Kraft as the tight end there. So I put, that would be kind of the upgrade that I'd be looking to do is going through on that one. Okay, and the 12-man is also a two wide receivers. So, and going back to that one, you do have a little bit of depth there, but that would be kind of I would be looking to potentially try and add some depth on that roster, and whether that's through the waiver wire, whether that's through potentially making a trade. But back to this one, the only move that I would probably make there is looking at Kraft and try to upgrade at the tight end position. So, and really with the tight ends, as I subscribe heavily to the streaming tight end type of deal, right? Like I don't necessarily want to give up any of my top end talent there to try and go get a top end tight end. Is certainly not with it. And then this season, certainly kind of playing that out. So, but I certainly wouldn't mind playing streaming tight end, and in a 10-person league, certainly should have some options there at tight end on the waiver wire. Really good question. So Mr. Wumbo says, yeah, I don't know why many people are holding on to so many QBs in certain leagues. It feels terrible to even own 2, let alone 3 or 4, and people are crazy. Yeah, especially in a single QB league, I can understand holding on to 2 and doing a quarterback by committee type of thing. But when you're talking about 3 or 4, in most leagues, those are roster positions that, quite frankly, are probably better served by having depth at running back or wide receiver. So I certainly understand your point. Mr. Wumbo saying, I know Bowers has looked pretty good or looked pretty meh over the last few weeks, even with Adams out, but there's no way that I'm starting Sermon over him, right? In a PPR. So at that point, I'm assuming we're talking about the flex there. And at that point, I'd be very curious who you're starting at tight end over Bowers. Yeah, because the only way that would make sense is if they're both in the flex. So, and the only reason you're thinking about that is because it's Denver. I mean, I get it. Denver's pass defense has been really good this season. I mean, that's at that point, I'd probably put Bowers in my tight end unless you've got McBride. Okay, like I get that one. Alrighty, let's dive a little deeper into this thing and see what we can see. Yeah, Mr. Rumbo, I do think that I might start Sermon over Bowers this week, especially if you need a floor play, right? Like if you're, I think Sermon will get you a very, very favorable floor play to it. I think he's got some pretty good upside this week as well, but um, yeah, I would lean on the Sermon over Bowers for my flex. It's a good question though. The Schmitty, Parkinson, Fant, Smith, Gasecki, Knox, Henry, start one. Holy moly, you've got the entire wide receiver streaming options there available. Okay, let's see what we can see here and what makes sense on this one. Colby Parkinson, maybe. Fant, I don't know that I'm wanting to start Fant this week. Hunter Henry, not so much. Seki. So Henry, Knox are out for me. Fant's out for me. Jono Smith would be out for me, and it comes down to Parkinson or Gasecki at that point. I think Colby Parkinson has probably the better week this week, and so I would probably lean on the Colby Parkinson route. Like it certainly hasn't been pretty throughout the season, but I think this would be the week that I'd feel pretty confident in playing him out of those options. So good question. Alrighty, Mr. Wumble saying that you've been trying to trade one of my tight ends for other stuff, but need to wait a bit with his concussion. I mean, McBride has cleared the concussion protocol, and it looks like he's ready to go here for Sunday. So if you're wanting to hold on to that a little bit longer, I get that one too. Mr. Wumble saying the league that they're in is thinking about benching Bowers and starting Myers, which also feels bad if they shut down the catching, they're super sure. At that point, right? Like if you're going up against that kind of matchup, right, and you've got a defense that's been pretty legitimate against the pass this year, yeah, it doesn't necessarily make sense to run two pass catchers out there. So, yeah, at that point, if you're starting both Bowers and starting Myers, at that point, I would, and I can pivot off of one of those. I'd make the pivot and put a running back in there from another game, especially a guy that I think will have a pretty safe floor for this week. So, a really good question. And the Schmitty saying thanks on that one. Alrighty. Well, guys, we're gonna hit up a couple of matchups here, and we're just gonna kind of rock and roll through a couple of these things. Again, any questions, any comments, go ahead and throw those things out, and let's go ahead and chat about them. First up matchup we're going to hit up here. We've got the Jets versus Minnesota. This is that early morning Saturday or Sunday game here. Minnesota favored by 2.5. The over under is 40.5. And no real, not a ton of key injuries to this one. I do think that we're going to see a Jordan Addison kind of go over his prop here. Minnesota's kind of been rolling here to start off the season, and I do think that we see some pretty good performances throughout on that side of the ball. The Jets, we could certainly see. I don't know that I'm necessarily leaning heavily on some of these guys. But if you've got Garrett Wilson, you've got Breece Hall, you're certainly gonna rock and roll on that one. I do think that Tyler Conklin could be a sneaky start this week as a streaming tight end. And on the on the other side of the ball, I do think that we're going to see pretty good performances out of Aaron Jones, Justin Jefferson. And I think Jordan Addison makes another showing here as well. All righty. The Schmitty over on YouTube, Boswell has is Boswell a good kicker to stream against Dallas? Not a bad option, right? It kind of depends too on what else is out there, right? Like, not necessarily a big, I'd rather, right, when I'm looking at kickers, I'd rather pick a guy that's kicking in a dome, kicking on the inside than trying to go with a guy that's kicking, outdoors, things like that. We've certainly seen Pittsburgh struggle to get the ball in the end zone when they get down in there, and they haven't really turned the ball over much, things like that. So it certainly leads to a lot of opportunities for Boswell. And I wouldn't mind streaming him, but again, right, it depends on what the other options are. So really good question. All righty. Let's go ahead and hit up the next matchup here. We got Cleveland, Washington. And with Cleveland, Washington game here, you've got some injuries here as well, right? David Njoku is questionable. Brian Robinson's questionable. Could be an interesting game here, right? Washington's offense has certainly kind of outkicked the coverage so far and been much better than we had anticipated early in the season. Cleveland's defense hasn't necessarily lived up to the hype. Still some pretty good secondary on this one. So it could be interesting to see how young Jaden Daniels is kind of tested this week. But I do think that Washington has a pretty good week here, and certainly looking to start Scary Terry this week. Certainly wouldn't mind, if Brian Robinson's out there, I'd play him. Cleveland's Cleveland, man. Like there is some of that, are we starting to see Deshaun Watson actually, remember how to play quarterback here? Could be interesting. And we certainly could see how that one comes to play here. But alrighty. And guys, if you have any other questions, comments, concerns, let's throw them in the chat. Let's go ahead and get those things talked about and get those lineup decisions, get those things ready to go for Sunday. And I tell you what, I'm going to hit up one or two more kind of matchups here, and then if there aren't any additional questions, we'll go ahead and call it a night here and all of that. But let's go ahead and hit up this one here. Baltimore, Cincinnati. Baltimore is favored by 2.5. The over under 49.5 in this one. So certainly some points potential to be scored here. Not a ton of key injuries with this one here. This one here, though, while Vegas sees this being a higher scoring affair, these AFC North matchups certainly a much tougher type of deal, and I think we're going to see a lower scoring affair in this one. Interested to see if do we continue to see the Cincinnati team struggle? Baltimore has had their moments this season, but certainly hasn't been super strong either way. So yeah, at that point, it could be very interesting to see how this one plays out. Alrighty. Well, guys, I do think that we've kind of come to the end of some of those questions here. And I do think that we're going to go ahead and we're going to call it a night and rock and roll. And if y'all have any additional questions, anything like that, you can certainly hit us up on all the socials, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, all of those places at Good Old Boys FF. And do us a favor and help support the independent podcast. Go ahead and head on over to YouTube, click that subscribe, hit that like button, and I think that's going to do it for us. Mr. Wumbo saying, all right, good luck and thanks a lot. Most welcome, and appreciate everybody tuning in. Appreciate everybody's questions and comments and the chat. It's always fun to get a chance to cut it up and chat with everybody out there and talk some fantasy football here on a Friday night and all of those good things. So, but that's going to do it for this fantasy football huddle. This was the week 5 bet set snap edition, and we'll be back on Tuesday, 11 p.m. Eastern with the whole crew here. Should be seeing Kevin and Alex and myself here. And that's going to do it for us. But thanks for everybody tuning in. Have a good one. Be safe. Toodaloos.